Welcome, I'm David, and this is Crime Line. Tonight, we journey to Greeley, Colorado, a city with deep agricultural roots in Weld County, a place where the vast plains meet the Rocky Mountain foothills. It's a story that begins with a seemingly casual, even friendly, invitation extended after a late night out at a local bar. An invitation that quickly and terrifyingly descends into a spiral of brutal murder, followed by a desperate, calculated attempt to erase all traces of the horrific crime by engulfing a home in flames. In the otherwise crisp autumn of 2021, 35-year-old Christopher Dickerson, a man who had just begun to celebrate the pride of new homeownership and was looking forward to a fresh professional start, extended a simple gesture of hospitality to two young women he had encountered by chance. This act, perhaps born of loneliness or a simple desire for company, would tragically prove to be his last, leading investigators down a dark path that would ultimately unravel a disturbing tale of jealousy, manipulation, and shocking, cold-blooded violence. This is the tragic and deeply unsettling case of Chris Dickerson and the two women whose brief, fateful meeting with him ended his life in an unimaginable disaster. The final hours of Christopher Dickerson's life began to tick away around 2 a.m. on a cool Saturday morning in October 2021. He was last seen on his own, a solitary figure stepping out from the weekend revelry of Cubitus, a popular bar in downtown Greeley. Surveillance footage, that silent, impartial witness, captured a pivotal, though at the time unremarkable, moment. Chris paused, briefly interacting with the occupants of a silver sedan idling nearby before continuing on his way towards home. Unbeknownst to Chris, as he walked into the pre-dawn stillness, that same silver sedan then slipped into the darkened streets, beginning to follow him, its presence a looming, unspoken threat. Just a few short hours later, as Sunday, October 3rd, 2021 was beginning to dawn, a frantic 911 call shattered the morning calm of Chris's usually quiet neighborhood on 15th Avenue Court. A terrified neighbor reported that Chris's house, his new sanctuary, was ferociously engulfed in flames, the inferno greedily consuming the structure. The neighbors, alerted by the roaring fire and the incessant, frantic barking of Chris's beloved white German shepherd, Juna, from the safety of the backyard, harbored a terrible fear that Chris was still trapped somewhere inside the burning building. Officers who were patrolling nearby arrived within mere moments to find the house already fully ablaze, a terrifying spectacle of leaping flames and billowing smoke against the early morning sky. They did what they could, battling against the heat and danger, to keep the blaze contained and prevent it from spreading to adjacent homes while they awaited the urgent arrival of the Greeley Fire Department. Once the firefighters were on scene, they expertly and courageously fought the inferno, eventually subduing the flames. And then, amidst the smoldering ashes and the charred, skeletal remains of what had once been Chris Dickerson's dream home, a grim discovery was made: the body of Christopher Dickerson. The blaze had been so devastatingly intense, so utterly destructive, that his identity had to be painstakingly certified through dental records. A subsequent autopsy soon delivered an even more horrifying truth, a revelation that shifted the narrative from tragic accident to malicious crime. Chris had been deceased before the fire had even been set. The medical examiner meticulously documented 5 distinct stab wounds to his neck, all chillingly concentrated within a small, 1-inch radius. The implement used, the report concluded, appeared to have been the blunt handle of a tool, possibly a metal file, which had broken in half during the brutal assault. The blunt end of this crudely improvised weapon, used with vicious force to end Chris's life, was found still lodged in his neck, leaving little doubt as to the direct cause of his death. His death was officially ruled a homicide, and the consuming fire that followed, a deliberate, calculated act of arson, undoubtedly designed to destroy any and all evidence and to conceal the horrific murder that had taken place within those walls. Chris Dickerson had only owned his cherished house on 15th Avenue Court for a few precious months. It was an achievement that had filled him with a profound and visible sense of accomplishment, a testament to his hard work and perseverance. He had spent several years living with his supportive parents, Alan and Elizabeth, diligently saving every penny he could muster for a down payment. By all accounts from family and friends, he was absolutely thrilled to have finally moved into his own place, a space to call his own. However, in the months leading up to his tragic and untimely death, other aspects of Chris's life had been in a period of significant flux and challenge. A long-term relationship, one that had progressed to a marriage proposal and a hopeful engagement, had unfortunately and painfully ended. The gold ring from that once promising engagement returned to him, a poignant symbol of a future that was not to be. He had also recently lost his job as a warehouse manager and shift supervisor at Noosa Yogurt, a well-regarded Colorado-based company known for its distinctive Australian-style yogurts. The period leading up to his dismissal from Noosa had reportedly been contentious. His family later voiced their belief that Chris had been unfairly fired, an act of retaliation after he, acting as a principled whistleblower, had spoken out against the company's alleged mistreatment of its contract workers. They saw him as a man of integrity, and that integrity, they felt, had cost him his job. Despite these recent professional and personal setbacks, Chris was said by those who knew him best to be doing relatively well, demonstrating resilience and optimism. His home purchase, while a significant investment, had not depleted all his savings. He still had a comfortable cushion of thousands in the bank. More importantly, he had actively sought new employment and had several job interviews scheduled for the upcoming Monday, a sign that things were indeed looking up. He was refocusing his energy, spending his free time pursuing the outdoor activities he loved: hiking, camping, and fishing in the breathtaking Colorado wilderness. He cherished the time spent with his close-knit family, with whom he shared a deep bond, and, of course, with his loyal and loving companion dog, Juna. When it was finally deemed safe for investigators to enter the hollowed-out, fire-ravaged shell of Chris's home, they began the painstaking, grim process of sifting through the ashes, the soot, and the debris, attempting to piece together the final, violent moments of his life. He was found by firefighters in what had been the living room area. The twisted wire springs from a couch were discovered beside him, a silent indication that he had likely been on the floor in front of that piece of furniture when he died. And when the fire was set, fragments of some of his clothing, remarkably, remained amidst the destruction. A laptop, melted into an unrecognizable shape by the intense heat, was found in the same room, alongside the charred remnants of other personal belongings. Intriguingly, much of the interior of Chris's bedroom, while heavily damaged by smoke and heat, had been somewhat spared by the direct onslaught of the flames. It was here that investigators found a scene of telling disarray. Personal items were piled haphazardly on the mattress. When these items were carefully removed, the bed beneath revealed their clean, stark outlines, vividly showing where the smoke had not yet managed to tarnish the fabric. It seemed highly unlikely. Investigators surmised that this chaotic mess was the normal state of Chris's new and evidently cherished home. The scene strongly suggested that someone had hastily and aggressively rummaged through his belongings just before the fire was ignited. On the bed, amidst the jumble, investigators found Chris's wallet and, even more significantly, an empty jewelry box. Chris's father, Alan, later confirmed to police that the gold engagement ring from Chris's failed relationship, the one that had been returned to him, was usually kept safely inside that very box. The ring was now missing, presumed stolen, adding a potential motive of robbery to the already horrifying crime. Investigators meticulously began to piece together a timeline of Chris Dickerson's movements on the night he was killed, a task heavily reliant on digital footprints and surveillance footage. On that evening of Saturday, October 2nd, the single 35-year-old had texted a friend, a message tinged with a hint of playful defiance. He remarked that he should be at home resting up for his important job interview scheduled for Monday, but instead, he was planning on hitting the bars for a night out. Cell phone records soon confirmed that Chris had indeed traveled to downtown Greeley. A series of security cameras captured him parking his blue Hyundai Elantra on a city street and then walking towards an establishment called Cubetas. He was wearing a distinctive t-shirt, a detail that would later aid in identifying him on various recordings. Inside the bar, another patron, unknowingly, inadvertently recorded Chris on a cell phone video. He was seen standing alone, slightly off to the side of the bustling dance floor, a solitary figure observing the crowd. Later that evening, he met up with a friend, a woman named Dolores, who was part of another small group. Chris greeted her warmly with a hug. They interacted briefly, and then again once more outside the bar a short time later, before Dolores's group moved on to another location, leaving Chris on his own once more. The night at Cubetas reportedly came to an abrupt and chaotic end following a skirmish that broke out amongst some drunken patrons. As individuals poured out of the back doors of the establishment to escape the commotion, cameras captured Chris Dickerson in that brief, seemingly innocuous, yet ultimately fateful interaction, an interaction that investigators would soon come to believe led directly to his brutal murder in a matter of mere hours. While walking past a silver Chevrolet Malibu that was idling nearby, Chris paused. He exchanged words, a brief conversation, with one or more individuals inside that vehicle. He then continued on his way, walking towards his own car, which was parked on a nearby street. As he did so, the silver Malibu, its occupants now unseen, appeared to subtly, almost predatorily, begin following him. The car was captured on various city surveillance cameras circling the block and then driving a street behind Chris as he headed for his Elantra. After Chris walked past a brightly lit shop window, the clear reflection of the silver Malibu was captured in the glass just moments later, a silent, ominous pursuer trailing him through the late-night streets, finally, at precisely 2:16 a.m. A Ring doorbell camera on 15th Avenue Court, Chris's own street, showed his blue Hyundai Elantra driving back towards his house, and following closely, undeniably behind it, was the silver sedan. The Malibu reached Chris's house and, after a moment's hesitation at the end of his driveway, it purposefully pulled in right behind him, its arrival marking the beginning of the end for Chris Dickerson. Investigators, armed with this crucial vehicle description, meticulously tracked the silver Malibu back to the Cubetas bar, where Chris was first captured encountering its occupants. From the surveillance cameras positioned at the bar's back entrance, they observed two figures emerging from that car earlier in the evening and then returning to it at the end of the night when the bar closed. The two women caught on camera had distinctive features that aided in their later identification. One wore her hair styled in a high twist on top of her head and was also wearing a visor. Her attire consisted of a long-sleeved black top with prominent white lettering down one sleeve. Her companion was dressed more casually, in a pink hoodie and jean capris. Later, outside Chris's house, footage from his own home security system captured these very same two figures. The footage showed a disturbing sequence of events after spending some time inside Chris's home. The group of three, Chris and the two women, emerged together. The two women then moved the silver Malibu from Chris's driveway onto the street. Then, in a move that puzzled investigators, all three individuals got into Chris's Elantra and drove off. When they returned a short time later, all three once again entered the house. The timeline captured on Chris's security system then took its most sinister and chilling turn. At 5:08 a.m., one of the female figures emerged alone from the front door of Chris's house and got into the silver Malibu, which was now parked expectantly on the street. That woman remained seated in the vehicle for almost 5 crucial minutes before the second woman finally left the house, quickly got into the passenger side of the Malibu, and they drove off together. However, their departure was short-lived. After only a few minutes, the silver Malibu returned, stealthily, to Chris's street. Multiple cameras in the neighborhood, including Chris's own, captured what happened next. This time, only one person, one of the women, re-entered Chris's home. Within moments, flashes of light, the first telltale signs of a nascent fire, were seen flickering from a window. The fire had been lit. When this person exited the house once more, they were observed walking, not running, but walking with a chilling calmness, back to the waiting car, the rapidly growing flames illuminating the horrific scene behind them through the front window as the two women coolly and deliberately left Chris Dickerson to die in his burning home. License plate readers strategically positioned around Greeley captured the registration of the silver Malibu. This critical piece of information linked the vehicle to a Mr. Rodriguez. In a further attempt to obfuscate their involvement, investigators discovered that after the Malibu left 15th Avenue Court for the final time, it was driven to a second local address, an apartment building where the car was abandoned. From that same address, a different vehicle, a Chevrolet Tahoe, then emerged. The arsonists, it was clear, had meticulously planned to switch vehicles to throw off any potential pursuit. This Tahoe was also photographed by a license plate reader, and its registration was traced to the sister of the Malibu's owner, a woman named Stacy Rodriguez. At 5'4" tall and weighing roughly 250 pounds, 19-year-old Stacy Rodriguez precisely fit the build and appearance of one of the women seen on the various surveillance footages, both at Cubetas and, more damningly, outside and around Chris's house on the night of the murder. Investigators quickly learned that she and her 23-year-old girlfriend, Hosanna Varela, were known to frequent Cubetas bar downtown. It was reportedly one of the few establishments in Greeley that would serve the underage Stacy alcohol without rigorously checking identification. The two women had originally met while working together at JBS, a large, international food manufacturing company with a significant processing plant in Greeley. Hosanna Varela, it was also discovered, was the mother of 3 young children from a previous relationship with her high school sweetheart, a man named Javier. However, that relationship had ended after Hosanna began an affair with Stacy Rodriguez. The two women's living situations had reportedly been somewhat unstable since they got together, moving in together intermittently. Having positively verified their identities and movements, police meticulously tracked the couple, Stacy and Hosanna, in the Chevrolet Tahoe while they were out running errands on an afternoon in early November, about a month after Chris's murder. When approached by detectives, both women initially appeared scared and were hesitant to talk. Hosanna Varela, when questioned separately by police, initially denied even recognizing a photo of Chris Dickerson. At first, she would not even confirm whether she had been with her girlfriend, Stacy. On the night of October 2nd into the 3rd, she eventually conceded to being at Cubetas with Stacy, but adamantly claimed not to have seen Chris or to have gone to anyone's house that night. Similarly, Stacy Rodriguez, when questioned while seated in the passenger seat of the Tahoe, admitted only to having been at the bar on the same night as Chris, but flatly denied ever encountering him or going to his address on 15th Avenue Court. She also denied knowing anyone who drove a silver Chevy Malibu or ever having driven one herself, lies that were directly contradicted by the mountain of evidence detectives had already amassed. The detectives, however, knew better. The registration on the Malibu was definitively in the name of Stacy's brother, and further investigation revealed the car was regularly driven by her mother. Cameras had irrefutably tracked the two women switching from the Malibu to the Tahoe at Stacy's mother's address after the murder in Arson. And most critically, Multiple surveillance cameras placed them leaving Cubetas in the silver Malibu and subsequently coming and going from Chris's house throughout those fatal early morning hours. Faced with this undeniable and overwhelming body of evidence, both Stacy Rodriguez and Hosanna Varela were arrested and charged with a litany of horrific crimes: first-degree murder, arson, burglary, and tampering with a deceased body. The case against Stacy Rodriguez and Hosanna Varela was, by all accounts, compelling and deeply disturbing. One of the two women, or perhaps both acting in concert, had brutally stabbed Chris Dickerson to death inside his own home that night, and then, with cold, calculated deliberation, had returned to set the house on fire in a callous attempt to destroy all evidence. Regardless of the specific, grisly role each individual woman had played in the physical act of murder, under the law, they were both potentially culpable for his death. Yet, despite the strong evidence placing them at the scene, significant gaps remained in the investigators' understanding of the crime, most notably, a clear and discernible motive. They had only speculation that the ransacked bedroom and the stolen engagement ring pointed towards a burglary. But whether this was the women's initial nefarious plan, or simply an opportunistic theft that occurred after the murder, remained an open question. As the two women awaited trial, investigators and prosecutors sought to fill these crucial gaps in their narrative of the crime. Eventually, Hosanna Varela, perhaps facing the stark reality of a long prison sentence and separation from her children, agreed to talk. She would provide prosecutors with her detailed version of the events of that horrific night, a proffer, in exchange for a plea deal, a significantly reduced sentence of 32 years in prison, with the added potential for that sentence to be further reduced in exchange for her complete and truthful testimony against her former girlfriend, Stacy Rodriguez. The story Hosanna then told, whether entirely truthful or strategically crafted, was nonetheless deeply disturbing and, in many of its more sensational aspects, almost unbelievable. Hosanna began her account by explaining that her romantic relationship with Stacy had blossomed during a period when she and her children's father, Javi, were experiencing a rough patch. Stacy, she said, had offered her the compliments, attention, and affection that she felt she had been sorely lacking in her relationship at home. But over time, Hosanna claimed this initial love affair had insidiously warped into a terrifying nightmare. She painstakingly portrayed herself as being deeply scared of Stacy, whom she alleged had become increasingly abusive and controlling as their relationship progressed. In a series of shocking allegations, Hosanna even claimed that Stacy had bragged to her about being an active part of a violent gang based in California, and, more chillingly, that Stacy had committed murder before they had ever met Chris Dickerson, possibly being responsible for the deaths of as many as 4 other people. Claims that, if true, painted Stacy not just as a murderer, but as a potential serial killer. Regarding the specific night of October 2nd into the 3rd, Hosanna stated that as they were leaving Cubetas Bar, Stacy was actively and openly asking around for an after-party. This was apparently a common practice for them. They would often go from the bars to various house parties, rarely knowing the people whose homes they ended up in. As Chris Dickerson walked past their silver Malibu, Stacy, seeing an opportunity, had called out to him. Chris, according to Hosanna, didn't have a party planned that night, but in a gesture of friendliness, he invited them back to his new place on 15th Avenue Court, saying he had a few beers they could share. Once at Chris's house, they all began drinking, just Budweisers at first. Hosanna recalled, the atmosphere was initially relaxed. The group then left briefly in Chris's blue Hyundai Elantra to pick up Chris's friend, Dolores, who had called him from the bar asking for a ride home. When they returned to Chris's house with Dolores, who was presumably dropped off or left separately, as she isn't mentioned further in the critical events, the vodka came out. According to Hosanna's damning testimony, Stacy then took on the role of bartender. Stacy, Hosanna alleged, purposefully and deceitfully served Chris potent double shots of vodka, while surreptitiously pouring herself and Hosanna significantly watered-down versions of the same drink, drinks that only appeared to be as strong as Chris's. Later in the early morning hours, after Stacy and Chris had stepped outside for a cigarette, a heated argument suddenly erupted between the two of them in the kitchen. This argument quickly escalated and spilled over into the living room. As the confrontation intensified, Hosanna claimed Stacy became physically aggressive, grabbing beer bottles and throwing them at Chris's head. She grabs the beer bottle and goes to hit him, but then she misses. Hosanna recounted vividly to investigators and later to the jury. And I go, "No, don't. Let's just leave it. Let's go." And she, looks at me with this look, and she grabs another beer bottle. And that's when she hits him on the head with it, and gets another one and then hits him again, and there's, evidence of the altercation all over. According to Hosanna's chilling account, Stacy then instructed her to retrieve a metal nail file, which had been innocuously sitting out on the kitchen table. Hosanna described this ordinary grooming tool as appearing to them in that moment like a shiv, a crude, improvised, and deadly sharp-pointed weapon. She claimed that, terrified, she handed this tool to Stacy and then immediately retreated back into the kitchen. Hosanna stated that she heard, but did not directly witness, what happened immediately afterwards in the living room. But she knew. She insisted with chilling certainty that Stacy used that implement to repeatedly stab Chris Dickerson. Afterwards, Hosanna recalled Stacy re-entering the kitchen with visible evidence of the violent assault on her hands and her face. Hosanna disturbingly described, lit up with energy. She was glowing, Hosanna chillingly testified. Apparently, Stacy then made a grotesque and macabre gesture, as if tasting the substance from her hand, and remarked with cold detachment, "Oh, that's dirty." Hosanna said Stacy then callously pulled Chris's lifeless body from the couch to the floor, an act Hosanna claimed was a deliberate attempt by Stacy to stage the scene, to make it appear as though there had been a prolonged struggle, so Stacy could later falsely claim she had killed Chris in self-defense. Her girlfriend, Hosanna asserted, then proceeded to ransack Chris's bedroom, methodically placing select items of value into a backpack as she went. Chris's wallet, Hosanna claimed, was pulled from his pants pocket and added to the bag of stolen goods. Later, after they had left the scene, the two women purchased a container of gasoline. They then returned to Chris's house. While Hosanna waited in the car, terrified and compliant, she said, Stacy went inside alone and set the house ablaze, then leisurely walked back to the vehicle as the flames began to illuminate the pre-dawn sky, consuming Chris's home and all evidence within. Though some of the more sensational details of Hosanna's story were undeniably strange and clearly self-serving, particularly her unsubstantiated claims about Stacy's alleged gang affiliations and past murders, the core of her narrative regarding the events inside Chris's house, the sequence of the assault, and the subsequent arson was largely corroborated by the physical evidence found at the scene, the autopsy results, and the precise timeline established by the various surveillance cameras. Hosanna's version of events, however damning to Stacy, was not the only one presented. Stacy Rodriguez's legal team mounted a vigorous defense, arguing that she did, in fact, stab Chris Dickerson, but that she had done so solely in self-defense during a terrifying encounter. They claimed that Chris, presumably heavily intoxicated, had turned aggressive and had left Stacy with no other choice but to defend herself and Hosanna from his advances or attack. Stacy herself even conceded during her trial that she was the one who had re-entered the house alone to set it on fire. But her defense attorneys argued that this desperate act of covering up the death and her subsequent lies to police were the unfortunate results of poor decision-making born out of extreme fear and panic in the aftermath of a traumatic event, not the calculated actions of a premeditated murderer. The trial of Stacy Rodriguez commenced in February 2025, a legal battle filled with disturbing testimony and conflicting narratives. Her defense team persistently argued that every decision Stacy made in the case could be traced back to overwhelming panic first, when she allegedly stabbed Chris while in mortal fear for her life. Then, when Hosanna Varela, facing the prospect of decades in prison and permanent separation from her young children, decided to fabricate or embellish her story in exchange for a proffer from the prosecution. And finally, they even suggested the prosecutor's office itself had panicked when they accepted Hosanna's strange and arguably unreliable story as the absolute truth because they were worried that there were far too many gaps and inconsistencies in their own theory of the crime to confidently proceed to trial without Hosanna's crucial, albeit compromised, testimony. The defense painted Stacy, who was only 19 years old at the time of the incident, as someone who found herself in a vulnerable situation, in a stranger's house, an encounter that unexpectedly and terrifyingly turned violent. He did corner her, her attorney argued passionately to the jury. She had to push him away, and it didn't stop. Stacy defended herself. She defended the woman that she loved to try to keep them safe. The state, however, believed they understood the true, chilling reason why Stacy Rodriguez had turned homicidal, based on crucial details Hosanna Varela had provided about Stacy's intense and possessive jealousy. Hosanna testified that after the group began drinking at Chris's house that night, Chris had, on 2 occasions, playfully slapped her on her backside. She also told jurors that Chris had generally paid more attention to her throughout the evening than he had to Stacy, asking Hosanna questions about herself and engaging her directly in conversation. Hosanna firmly believed that this perceived slight, this shift of attention, had caused Stacy's abrupt, jealous, and ultimately violent change in mood. Hosanna steadfastly maintained during her testimony that she did not witness any behavior from Chris Dickerson that indicated he was the initial aggressor or that he posed any physical threat to them. She also chillingly testified that Stacy had confessed her intent to kill Chris while they were in the car on their way to pick up his friend Dolores, a decision made even before Chris had allegedly inappropriately touched Hosanna's butt later that night. And Hosanna described the physical confrontation beginning in the kitchen, with Chris leaning over Stacy, who was backed against a wall, but, crucially, not physically touching her at that moment. It was Stacy, Hosanna insisted, who initiated the physical violence, pushing Chris, who then stumbled. After Chris, understandably upset, yelled for them to get out of his house, Stacy allegedly escalated the assault, pushing him onto the couch, grabbing a beer bottle, and despite Hosanna's desperate pleas for them to just leave, Stacy allegedly threw the bottle at him, then grabbed another and struck him in the face with it, climbing on top of him before demanding that Hosanna hand her the shiv. And the state further asserted that Hosanna Varela had initially withheld the full, horrifying truth from law enforcement, not because she was a willing accomplice, but because she genuinely feared what Stacy Rodriguez, a woman she now believed capable of extreme violence, would do to her and, more importantly, to her family and children. Her claims of being in an abusive and fear-filled relationship were, however, vigorously questioned by the defense. They argued that this narrative of abuse was nothing more than a convenient framing of their relationship, a story that conveniently emerged only after her arrest and the offer of a plea deal. They suggested that if there was a significant power dynamic in the romance, it actually went the other way. Stacy was only 19 when she first met Hosanna, still lived with her mother, and it was her first serious romantic relationship. Hosanna, in contrast, was 4 years older, already a mother of 3 young children, and had been living independently since the age of 18. The defense sought to paint Hosanna as a habitual drunk who routinely disregarded her commitment to Stacy by frequently returning to her ex-partner. Javi, Stacy, they contended, had passively accepted this poor treatment without complaint. Investigators had found an astonishing 51,000 photos on Hosanna's cell phone, including thousands of selfies. Yet, despite Hosanna's multiple and varied claims of severe physical abuse at Stacy's hands, not a single one of these thousands of photos showed any of the injuries she claimed Stacy had inflicted upon her. There were, however, numerous photos of the couple appearing happy and affectionate, often pictured together with Hosanna's children. While photographic evidence supporting Hosanna's claims of abuse was conspicuously absent, there were letters and diary-like entries that seemed to lend some credence to her assertions of fear. In the notes function of her cell phone, she had recorded several personal statements. These included entries expressing her deep regret over her separation from Javi, the father of her children, and, significantly, her palpable fear of Stacy. One particularly chilling entry documented a specific incident in which Stacy allegedly held a knife to Hosanna's throat. Hosanna also produced incriminating messages she claimed were from Stacy. In one of these, Stacy had allegedly written, "I'll kill an MF for you," like 6 feet under. Then there was the matter of the jailhouse letters. Handwritten notes allegedly passed through the confines of the Weld County Jail from Stacy to Hosanna following their arrests for murder. The most incriminating of these letters, Stacy vehemently denied writing. In one such letter, the writer issued chilling threats against both Javi and Hosanna's 3 children. In another, crudely written on a paper towel, the writer urged Hosanna not to cooperate with police. "I hope you kept the same story. You ain't dumb, I know. You ain't see or do or hear anything. I know it's Baby Joker's fault. And don't be stupid. Play dumb." Hosanna testified that Baby Joker was Stacy's gang name or street moniker. Stacy conceded during her trial that Baby Joker was indeed her nickname, but claimed it was a harmless nickname given to her by other inmates at the county jail after her arrest, not a gang identifier. Observers in the courtroom noted that while the jury was out of the courtroom during trial proceedings, Stacy Rodriguez often smiled, laughed, and joked around, behavior she exhibited almost every day she was on trial for murder, a demeanor that many found unsettling given the gravity of the charges against her. When she eventually took the stand in her own defense, Stacy attempted to explain this behavior, claiming she suffered from severe social anxiety, which paradoxically caused her to become very quiet and meek at times, but also to sometimes smile and laugh inappropriately as a nervous reaction, not as a sign of amusement or disrespect. On the stand, Stacy Rodriguez also sought to debunk the prosecution's theory that she was consumed by jealousy on the night Chris Dickerson was killed. She was simply not a jealous person, she insisted. She claimed she did not perceive that Chris was paying more attention to Hosanna as they drank at his house. In fact, she asserted, Chris had touched her butt as well, a couple of times, just a light tap, as she was passing a door frame, an act she initially dismissed as possibly accidental. According to Stacy's version of events, the fatal argument with Chris began not over attention or jealousy, but over his use of the shiv-like tool, which she said was sitting in plain view on his kitchen table. She claimed Chris began to brag to her about getting into fights while carrying this improvised weapon. In response, Stacy said she asked him if carrying such a weapon made him feel like a man. He allegedly took grave offense at this question and began coming towards her aggressively, yelling, "Are you calling me a bitch?" She described him cornering her, his arms over her, yelling in her face, his breath and spit hitting her. She claimed that when he turned to look at Hosanna, who, according to Stacy, had told Chris to get off of her, Stacy took the opportunity to push him back. In this dramatic version of events, The two women then tried to run for the door, only to have Chris grab Hosanna and pull her towards him. Stacy claimed she was unable to open the door and leave the house for some unknown reason. In her alleged attempt to save her girlfriend, Hosanna, she claimed she was pushed onto the couch by Chris. A physical struggle with Chris then ensued. Stacy alleged that Hosanna introduced the shiv into the altercation, though not by Stacy's instruction. Hosanna, she claimed, had taken it from the kitchen table, but it somehow ended up in the possession of Chris, who had perhaps pulled it from Hosanna's hands. The two women then allegedly fought Chris for the weapon, with the tragic result being Stacy stabbing him. She testified that she did not know how many times she had stabbed him, but that when she was finally able to sit up, the tool had broken in half, and Chris was on the floor, the shiv horrifically embedded in his neck. Stacy Rodriguez further told the jury that all the subsequent criminal steps taken by the women that night, the cleanup, the theft, the arson, happened in a confused blur. Hosanna, she claimed, had completely taken control of the situation. It was Hosanna, Stacy asserted, who had placed items into a backpack and carried them from the house. It was Hosanna, she claimed, who drove to the gas station to purchase gasoline and who then instructed Stacy to go back into the house and burn it down, even telling her to kill Chris's dog, Juna, an act Stacy did not carry out. The state, during cross-examination, rigorously questioned the logic and plausibility of Stacy's self-defense story, particularly how a man supposedly as strong and aggressive as Chris could be so easily overpowered by Stacy if he was indeed the primary aggressor, and how all the stab wounds could be so closely and fatally clustered in his neck if it was truly a chaotic, desperate struggle for a weapon. Perhaps most damning to her credibility on the stand was Stacy's continued and adamant assertion that she was not the author of the most incriminating of the jailhouse letters, the ones containing threats and instructions to Hosanna. Prosecutors meticulously and effectively pointed out the remarkable, almost fingerprint-like similarities in the unique language. The specific abbreviations used, such as SMH for Shake My Head, LMFAO, and STD. The same Spanish terms interspersed with English, and even identical misspellings such as the word even that were present in both the letters she readily admitted were hers and those that she vehemently denied writing. Despite Stacy's often contradictory and impeached testimony, her defense attorneys presented a full-throated, aggressive defense. They played jailhouse calls between Hosanna and her children, emphasizing the anguish and pain in the young mother's voice, arguing that Hosanna would say absolutely anything to secure her release and be reunited with her children. They meticulously picked apart Hosanna's claims against Stacy, arguing they were too numerous, too extreme, and too unrealistic to be believable. For instance, Hosanna had claimed that Stacy had stolen a Walmart gift card from Chris and used it for a purchase sometime later, but the defense pointed out, 8 additional Walmart gift cards were found untouched in Chris's house after the fire. If theft was a motive, why not also take these? Hosanna had also stated that she saw Stacy steal Chris's wallet from his pants pocket during the ransacking of the bedroom, but Chris's wallet, too, had been found inside the house after the fire, albeit empty of cash. The valuable engagement ring, however, was never located. The defense summarized Hosanna's shocking litany of accusations against Stacy, a domestic violence batterer who allegedly hit her partner with a car 3 different times, held a knife to her throat, beat her, caused cuts all over her body, and who threatened her children's lives. A purported serial killer who had murdered 3 to 4 other people and then burned their bodies to get away with it. And now also, supposedly, a member of an unknown California gang, someone who was inexplicably really into fires, and who allegedly stole her murdered victim's belongings only to just burn them later. And finally, a person who apparently lied under oath about having social anxiety to explain her courtroom demeanor. They further argued that the physical evidence itself particularly the apparent use of the blunt end of the broken tool, actually supported a finding of panicked self-defense, not a calculated, premeditated killing. If the prosecution just stood here and told you that he was laying unconscious on the couch with his neck vulnerable, the defense attorney challenged the jury. Why would she use the blunt end? Why would she risk that injury to herself if her goal and her entire purpose for all this was to kill him? You don't use the blunt end. The state, in its closing arguments, countered that it ultimately did not matter whether each and every one of Hosanna's more extreme beliefs about her former lover Stacy, such as her being a serial killer or a hardened gang member, were objectively true. It mattered only, they argued, that Hosanna believed these things to be true, causing her to genuinely fear Stacy, a fear that would explain her initial reluctance to tell the complete and unvarnished truth to law enforcement. Hosanna, the prosecution contended, was telling the only version of events that ultimately made sense of the horrific evidence. Think closely and clearly, the prosecutor urged the jury. How would self-defense have been detrimental to Hosanna Varela? What motive does she have to lie if she's trying to run out of this house and she gets pulled back by this man and her girlfriend defends her, saves her? If that was the truth, why would she not do it? When the jury finally returned after their deliberations, they found Stacy Rodriguez guilty on every single count. First-degree murder, a charge which under Colorado law, particularly considering aspects of felony murder, a killing occurring during the commission of another felony such as arson or burglary, carries an extremely severe penalty, typically life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, arson, which itself is a serious felony in Colorado. Especially when it involves an occupied structure, tampering with a deceased human body, a Class 3 felony, and burglary, also a felony depending on its degree. Her first-degree murder conviction alone carried an automatic life sentence without the possibility of parole. At her subsequent sentencing hearing, Chris Dickerson's father, Alan, spoke eloquently and heartbreakingly about the kind and loving son he had tragically lost, finally bringing the focus of the court back to where it should have always been, on the life and the senseless, heartbreaking killing of Christopher Dickerson, a man who had simply befriended two young women and paid the ultimate price. Weld County Judge Vicente Vigil, in handing down the sentence, sternly condemned Stacy Rodriguez's horrible actions and choices, both in the commission of the brutal act itself and in the calculated choices she made afterwards to conceal her crime. He sentenced her to life in prison without parole for the murder, and then handed down significant additional consecutive sentences: 32 years for the arson, 12 years for tampering with the body, and another 12 years for each of the burglary charges. As of the original reporting of this case, it remained unclear what amount of time, if any, would ultimately be removed from the 32-year sentence originally agreed to by Hosanna Varela as a result of her testimony against her former lover and co-defendant, Stacy Rodriguez. The brutal murder of Christopher Dickerson was a deeply senseless and profound tragedy, a stark illustration of how a seemingly innocent chance encounter, a simple invitation for an after-party, can quickly spiral into a night of unimaginable violence and irreversible loss. A man who had just found pride and joy in his new home, a man who loved his family and his loyal dog, had his life viciously and cruelly cut short, his future filled with promise, extinguished by a destructive and lethal combination of jealousy, manipulation, and shocking brutality. Thank you for joining me on Crime Line. This case serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can sometimes lie hidden beneath seemingly ordinary encounters, and the devastating, far-reaching impact of choices made in anger, deceit, and profound disregard for human life. We explore these difficult cases not for sensation, but to understand the complexities of human behavior, to honor the victims whose lives were tragically altered or ended, and to hope that by shining a light on such darkness, we can, in some small way, contribute to a safer world. We'll see you on the next investigation.